With the most recent community update, Fatshark has announced that they are looking at potential Ogryn and Psyker buffs to bring the classes a little more up to speed. I've seen a lot of discussion regarding what exactly these buffs should look like, and after some consideration, I'd like to present my ideas for what Fatshark should buff regarding these classes. I've also had some people directly ask me how I would buff Ogryn and Psyker, so consider this my official response. I will be presenting these buffs in a round kind of system, the first of which will have the most significant buffs, while the subsequent second and third rounds will have lesser, more subtle buffs. The reason for this is because, all things considered, in my opinion, Psyker and Ogryn actually aren't that bad and are really close to being good. They don't need these large, overarching reworks or changes to make them good. They just need small, subtle tweaks here and there, which is why we're going to be making small changes at first through these rounds, so that if Fatshark wants to implement them, they can implement the rounds and then have the community test those changes, and then if at that point the community and Fatshark decides Ogryn and Psyker needs more buffs, we can then move on and implement the second round, and then rinse and repeat that process until everyone is happy with the two classes. Starting us off on Ogryn, what exactly is the problem or the complaint everybody has with Ogryn? The complaint everyone has with Ogryn is that he doesn't have enough killing power. He just knocks things around but doesn't really kill them. He's a big target and takes a lot of damage that a lot of people feel as if they can't avoid or really control in any way due to his size, and he's really clunky to play combat-wise. So, for his first round of buffs, I would recommend adding to his passive excessive force an extra 20% more cleave to all attacks. This is going to do two things mainly. First, it's going to allow him to control hordes much easier, since he does tend to hit that cleave cap pretty frequently as is, but with this buff to cleave, he's going to be able to cleave through a lot more and control hordes a lot more, which will actually prevent him from taking a lot of damage, since he'll be able to control the hordes, and he's also going to, by default, be doing more damage, since he's going to be cleaving through more enemies. On top of that, I would also boost his base toughness from 100 to 150. To be honest, I don't actually know why this isn't always the case. I know that Ogryn's supposed to be, like, the big tough guy, and he's supposed to have more health than Zealot, but I don't know why he doesn't have more toughness. I think it would have made sense to have him kind of be the in-between of Veteran and Zealot with toughness, with Veteran having the most at 200, Zealot having the least at 100, and Ogryn having the kind of the middle ground base at 150 base toughness, but that would also go a long way to help his survivability, so I would also give him 50 base toughness. For his second round, if that is not enough and he needs more buffs, I would add 5% attack speed across the board, as well as a 5% cooldown reduction to his, what would I refer to it as? There's kind of a weird thing with Ogryn. Whenever you're going through a windup of an attack or going through a cooldown of an attack with pretty much any single weapon in the game, save for like one or two, you can pretty much block cancel, or just block and automatically cancel that attack windup or that attack cooldown, which will bring you immediately out of the animation and allow you to block, which allows a lot of the classes to have, you know, really good snappy defenses. Ogryn, for some reason, doesn't really have that on most of his weapons. Most of his weapons force you to go through the full wind-up animation, or force you to go through the full cooldown animation, which actually prevents him from having a lot of defensive capabilities. So, honestly, I have a feeling that's kind of intentional in design, because Ogryn's supposed to be this big, strong, clunky dude, so I don't want to completely take that away, but I would like to see Ogryn be able to recover from those animations 5% faster, as well as gaining 5% attack speed buff across the board, which should make him feel less clunky to play and make him feel a lot more responsive. For his final third round, I would increase his thick skin passive, his damage reduction, from 20% to 25%. I would not touch his base health, because as it stands, you can actually stack Curio plus health in order to get up to 550 health if not more. So adding more health to him base is actually going to potentially cause problems and potentially cause power creep issues down the line if Fat Shark decides to start changing, you know, health values down the line with like other classes or other feats or other curio trinkets and whatnot. So I would not actually be touching his health in this case. I would be touching his damage resistance, which should just go up by a simple 5%, which should make him able to absorb more hits and be able to, along with the round 1 and round 2 buffs, allow him to survive a lot easier. Regarding Psyker, I actually think Psyker is in a pretty good position compared to Ogryn and needs even less significant buffs in order to bring them up to speed, which is why my recommendation for buffs aren't as drastic as I would say as Ogryn's. For the first round of buffs for Psyker, I would first roll back the Quell change that they did. They said that they fixed Quell's speed, but in actuality, it ended up being a nerf to the overall Quell speed of Psyker, because originally, if you wanted to have, you know, really fast Quell speed, you would take a non-force weapon like a rapier or, you know, one of the Devil's Claw swords or a tactical axe or something like that in order to get fast Quell speed. But now the Quell speed on non-force weapons is super slow, just as slow as force weapons. So revert that change so that Psyker has an option for fast passive Quell. And then also, I would make a recommendation to kind of almost rework how Brain Burst works. How I would change it is that Brain Burst now one-shots non-monster enemies, every single one in the game, but the charge time for Brain Burst scales depending on how much health that enemy currently has. So for instance, if you're trying to head pop a Crusher, it's going to take much, much longer to head pop that Crusher than if you're trying to head pop a Poxwalker, but no matter who you head pop, the Crusher or the Poxwalker, it's going to one-shot them regardless. This will allow Psyker to contribute more towards his team through sniping with Brain Burst and not allow him to be constantly outclassed by the Veteran and in some cases the Zealot when they're trying to pick off specials from across the map. On top of that, I would also move the stagger that Brain Burst gets from the end of the animation to the start of the animation. For those that don't know, towards the end of the animation, Brain Burst has a little kind of stagger animation that it applies to enemies who it's currently targeting, non-monstrosities as always, and for some reason they moved it to the end of the animation when usually, I think in the first beta this was actually at the start of the animation, so you would begin Brain Bursting something, they would immediately stagger, and then you would complete the Brain Burst before they recovered from the stagger animation, which was really, really nice and made Brain Burst feel a lot better to play and more reliable. So I would actually revert that change and move that stagger back to the beginning of the animation. For the round 2 buffs, I would change one of the hidden, I guess you could call it passives of Psyker regarding sprinting. For those that don't know, every single class has a toughness damage modifier to them, a hidden one when they are dodging, sprinting, and sliding. It's different for every single class, but for Psyker, it's as follows. Dodging, he will take half toughness damage. Sliding, they will also take half toughness damage. Sprinting, though, they will take increased damage by 0.25%. I would change it so that the damage received while sprinting is no longer increased by a quarter, but instead once more reduced by half. As it stands, Psyker's pretty squishy, so, and a lot of the time, Psyker ends up, you know, running to and from in order to, like, run to cover, because Psyker is pretty much the one who desperately needs cover out of the most of everybody, because Psykers get melted the fastest, but if you make this change, this would actually allow Psyker to move around a lot more freely and actually allow them to survive a lot more. Because unfortunately, while we may like to be able to spam sliding everywhere only works up to a very specific point, in which case you run out of slide and then you can't slide anymore. So this would help Psyker. And then finally, for the round 3 increase, if Psyker still needs buffs after that, I would actually just increase the overall Quell speed, active and passive, by 10%. I don't actually think Psyker desperately needs this. I think after the round 2 buffs, Psyker would be perfectly fine balance-wise, but in case he does need another buff, I would recommend an overall Quell speed buff in order to allow them to use their Brain Burst, their hopefully reworked Brain Burst, a lot more, as well as use their staves a lot more. Because if you really think about it, Brain Burst and the Stabs aren't really that overpowered because they're more delegated to a support role than they are to an actual main damage role, so they're not wildly overpowered. So allowing the Psyker to use them a little bit more isn't going to hurt anyone in the grand scheme of things, and it's going to allow Psyker to interact a lot more with the gameplay and therefore make it a lot more fun for Psyker. Because the most frustrating thing for Psyker, in my opinion, is constantly having to, like, sit there and, like, head pop twice and then quell for, like, 5 seconds and essentially just do nothing behind the scenes. Same thing with the Stabs. You know, it's kind of frustrating to use the staff and then have to just kind of sit there in the back and quell for a couple of seconds and do nothing. So increasing the overall quell speed will allow more uptime for these things and allow Psyker to just do more and have more fun. Overall, I think all of these buffs are going to make these classes feel a lot better to play overall, and it's not going to break the bank when it comes to their power level. It's going to make them on par with Veteran and Zealot, in my opinion, and it's not going to leave them kind of in the dust, but it's also not going to make them so wildly overpowered that there's pretty much no reason to run anything else. So, thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and we can talk about it. Peace, y'all.